Hi, everybody. Thanks to the people who came out in person, and thanks to everybody on Zoom. My name is Jonathan Freeman. I'm the president of Phi Rho Sigma, and today I have the pleasure of introducing our speaker, Dr. James Betts. He's a professor of surgery and urology at UCSF Benioff, and he is specializing in pediatric traumatic injuries. He's a founding director of the Peace Trauma Program at UCS Benioff Children's Hospital in Oakland, and he's well published in his field. Aside from his career in medicine, he's also served as a firefighter for the Big Sur Fire Department and as a tactical physician. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Dr. James Betts.
Thank you very much. And I really am honored to be able to address the Phi Rho Sigma Medical Society today. What I wanted to do was look at how we all in medicine can have a career of service. And to me, that means you're going beyond what your normal training, your normal day-to-day activity is, and giving up something that is a little bit more than what you normally would have, and something that you wouldn't necessarily feel you would have wanted to do had you not taken a little different view of your career, your person, and how best to serve society. So for me, it really included medical, fire, and the FBI in my specific instance. You want to be able to look at a local, regional, national, and perhaps even international service, if that's what interests you. And really following this with an honor and integrity and trust and respect for everyone with whom you're dealing. So for me, I sort of have the ideal career for a young boy or girl's aspirations. I do a little red. I serve as a firefighter in Big Sur, which is an area south of the Bay Area. I'm a pediatric surgeon, and I also do urology at Children's Hospital Oakland. We're now part of a UCSF combined institution. And I'm also a tactical physician who deploys with the FBI SWAT team on a regular basis. So for me, I grew up in rural Vermont. It's a town of about 8,000 when I was there. It then pretty much grew to 15 to 20,000, and now it's back down to 8,000 again. I was raised by a single widowed mom. My older sister and my late brother and myself lived in downtown Bennington. We knew everyone. She took over running a restaurant that my grandfather had started back in the 1920s. And when my dad died when I was about 9, she ran it herself for almost 4 or 5 years until she then sold the business. We had no medical insurance. A family physician from the University of Vermont, where I matriculated, moved in next door. And I used to look out the window and see him up and leaving at 5:36 in the morning. And then he'd come back at 6, 7 o'clock at night. So I decided I'd go over and speak with him, see what he did. Back in those days, there really was no HIPAA violation. We knew everyone. He told me he was going to see Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so, what they had for a condition. When he came back, he'd show me what he actually did for each of those individuals. So I sort of hung out with him. At that point, I really had aspirations, even at age 9, of going into medicine. Our community had a volunteer rescue squad, a very small volunteer fire department, and the police force was, again, pretty small, 7 or 8 officers, 1 vehicle, 1 motorcycle. Now that's grown to 60 officers, a SWAT team. The issue now with New England, as it is with many places, are drugs and crime. And so it's really changed over time. My medical career, I started out at the University of Vermont as an undergraduate. both for my degree of 4 years there as my matriculation for my bachelor's degree, and then I went on to go to medical school. I worked summers as a union, quote, steel worker. We were all unionized. We didn't do the structural steel, but the group of college students put down some of the rods for concrete, but we all got the same pay. And we had medical insurance at that point, which was $10 a month. So that was the first medical insurance that really our family had. After graduating from medical school in 1973, I went to Charleston, South Carolina, the Medical University of South Carolina, where I did 2 years of surgical residency. It was pretty much a shocking experience coming from very rural Vermont, which at the time and still is the second whitest state in the nation. Maine is the first. To Charleston, which obviously was the seat of the South. The climate was different. Racism was everywhere, including in the medical school as well as the community. I really became interested in burns and trauma there. We had a very large trauma center and burn unit. It was the largest civilian burn unit in the United States. And I had an interest in doing pediatric surgery. But then at the time, as many of you will have as you're going through your medical school experience, I had a change and decided I wanted to do urology. So I went to the Medical College of Virginia in Richmond. I did 3 years of adult urology residency. It was the capital of the Confederacy. There again, if you look at what's happened even recently, there were a lot of statues, a lot of issues relative to the Confederacy, which have been changed in this day and age. The College of Medicine was funded heavily by tobacco. And as it turned out, the dean who took over the College of Medicine was the first dean to have on cigarettes. Smoking is hazardous to your health. So that changed a lot of the funding. Up through that time, I was married, went through a divorce, moving here and there for some of my residencies, and also knowing that I was going to be moving elsewhere. It just worked that we felt it was best not to stay married. We didn't have children. And so it was a tough time, again, a seminal time in my life. But moving forward, we felt that that was best. I went to the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, did a 1-year fellowship in pediatric urology. I was planning on coming back to MCV-VCU and be their academic pediatric urologist. But when I was in Philadelphia during my pediatric residency, I rotated on pediatric surgery, had a career change, and decided to finish general surgery and pediatric surgery. So I went to Mount Sinai Hospital in Cleveland, which at that time was a Case Western Reserve affiliate. The hospital no longer exists. It all was absorbed into Case Western. I did 2 years of adult residency. It was a pretty unique program. We were sort of a blended group of residents. A number of us came there because we had changes in plans. We had significant independence. We were talking earlier about doing procedures and taking care of patients on our own, which we did. It was an 800-bed Jewish hospital, but it really was the trauma center for Cleveland. And it really was an area where we served the underserved for the city of Cleveland. We became the regional trauma center of sorts because we saw all of the gunshot wounds as well as blunt trauma. And the chair, who just retired a few years ago, Jeff Ponsky, is a very visionary person. He really started doing surgical endoscopy as well as pushing and promoting laparoscopy at the time. So something that really was unheard of. I came back to CHOP in 1981, 1983 to do pediatric surgery. It was a structured program. It was really Renaissance surgery, as pediatric surgery was at the time. You did pretty much everything except for orthopedics and neurosurgery and cardiac surgery, but the whole rest of the body was your purview. We had a pediatric burn and trauma center. It was something that wasn't recognized as needing to have pediatric expertise, but we took care of everyone who came to that pediatric center at the time. There were many career opportunities and locations after I finished. There were only 15 pediatric surgery fellows who finished a year, and I bet there were 100, 150 places to go. So I ended up coming out to Oakland, where I landed in July of 1983 and stayed there ever since. We were mission-based, still are. We're a safety net hospital. We take patients from the Oregon and Nevada borders, north and east of us, and down to Monterey. We have surgical residents as well as urology residents. At the time, we were training a lot of the residents from the non-university related programs. And these were Navy, Air Force, Army residents, as well as several smaller hospitals around the Bay Area. So these were all coalesced into one residency, now run by Greg Victorino in the East Bay. It's part of the UCSF residency program. There's also a program on the West Bay. And Children's Hospital was absorbed by UCSF, with Mark Benioff donating $200 million to have this be a unified pediatric program. So one of my patients, this is a mom, little baby who was born with gastroschisis, ended up losing a lot of her small bowel, was on IV support and very gradual nasogastric feedings. This is a picture of her when she was leaving the hospital finally. So very blended parents as well. Mom on the right was a rock guitar player for a fairly well-known but local rock group. Dad was the stage manager, and his family came from the Oakland area. So here she is at about a year and a half, almost year and a half of age, pretty much on her own and doing really well. A very satisfying outcome for this child. Another patient who was born had necrotizing enterocolitis, very severe inflammation, went through the same process of a long history. What's interesting is that mom is holding the baby, and not until her mom told this mom that I had operated on mom when she was 2 days old for a malrotation with a volvulus. And she obviously has done quite well. So you can see that over the course of time, when you're spending your career in one place, and I happen to be one of the rare people who went to their first assignment and then stayed for the whole, now almost 40 years of my career. My fire career really began a while ago with Big Sur. So we're a volunteer fire department. Nationwide, 70% of all fire departments are volunteer and 30% are paid. In California, that's almost the opposite because of the fact that there is a state fire department, CAL FIRE. So I would imagine here, and I know here in Omaha, it is a paid professional department. We all consider ourselves, and we're all certified the same as any of the city firefighters are, as paid volunteers. Fire department was founded in 1974. For those of you who may be familiar with the Bay Area, it covers 59 miles of Highway 1 from one point in the northern part of the county to the San Luis Obispo County line. And then we cover west to the ocean, as well as inland 3 to 5 miles. So it really is a service of integrity, commitment, and respect. We do structured wildland fires, cliff rescues, vehicle extrications, We back up an ALS unit, which is permanently positioned in Big Sur. We're all first responders. A number of our firefighters are EMTs. We have a nurse who's a medical captain. She's also a certified firefighter. And of course, for me, I am a physician. I'm always a physician in the field, but I am also a certified firefighter. So we go through a 6-month academy. We're all low angle rope rescue certified. We're all hazmat certified. We have mandatory trainings, recertifications, driver's license enhancement to be able to drive in equipment code 3. Pretty small group. There are 19 active and 9 probationary members. So for an area to cover that amount 24/7, 365, it does take a commitment of service. And in this regard, that's one area where I feel it's important to serve. I serve as the duty officer when I'm there. If I'm not on call at the hospital, then I will be in Big Sur as a firefighter. We are all paged out individually. We all have radios. There are 3 stations. No one really stays at the stations, but you're out doing your own job. So it really is personal, family, job commitment, and then commitment as a firefighter. So for me, the 2 to 3 weekends a month is something I look forward to. It can be stressful, but to me, again, it's an area of service. I have a house in Big Sur. It's on the coast, and our fire chief and his wife live there. They caretake the house, and he's also a battalion chief in Monterey. So fire season, which used to be really during the summer, as we all know, is all year long. So when you have heavy rains that we've had just recently, that results in a significant amount of growth, especially of flash fuels like grasses. And in the summer, those are all very dry. California is almost the opposite. That during the winter, in many places, everything is brown and in hibernation. For California, in the winter, everything is green. In the summer, it's very brown and very hazardous in terms of large and small fires. The picture of me with one of our engines. We do a lot of training. We do a lot of community service. This was a fire that occurred in 2013. I was actually in Oakland and was called by our chief, who's on the left side kneeling, to come down right away. The fire had, at the time, he was the assistant chief, had totally destroyed our chief's house, even though she had totally defensible space, had 15,000 gallons of water. These fires roll through at 1,800 degrees and up to 40 to 50 miles an hour. And there's almost no way it creates its own weather to get control of them. So these are campaign fires that literally can go on for months. The picture of the fire coming up the hill, we were all standing in the lower left corner of this area. We were going to try and stop it before it was cresting that area of the road, which was clear. Here's a picture of us as it was coming up. We were able to gain control of it and save not only some homes, but hopefully protect another 100 to 200 acres in this area. And this particular fire burned 167,000 acres over the course of 2 to 3 months. So a picture taken from my house. This is Assistant Chief Harris at the time and his wife and one of our lieutenants, and you can see their dog as the fire lays down during the night, and we were just watching it to make certain that it wasn't going to come up over the hill and then come onto my property, which is very rural. But again, we have a lot of water available in hose. This is my house on the hill. It's pretty much off the grid. It's solar for electricity. We have well water. And just recently at that time, it placed a permanent landline phone. So we had hose lays out. This is the caretaker's house that I stay in when I go down because Matt and Jackie are in the regular house. Also with some of our training in doing cliff rescue. That's an area about 400 feet above the ocean. We're all roped in and would go over to rescue someone who may have tried to hike down a trail. The areas that we train are pretty well known to a lot of people, even though they're off limits. People do things with not the best judgment and either get trapped or fall and have to be rescued. Here's an actual rescue that I went over with a medical pack on my back, and the individual was probably 400 feet down, and it was 200 feet from the rocky coast. He had a turned ankle, and we ended up having to bring him up in a Stokes, but none the worse for wear, but of course put 6 or 7 of us at risk to have to retrieve him. Training occurs on a regular basis, just a glorious view of the ocean. You can see that we have our ropes tied on to our vehicles and we're all going through instruction. We also do vehicle extrication, which takes practice. And we do have a number of cars, probably even more so than what the city has, that will have to extricate an individual. Either they have been driving, go over the edge. Oftentimes they're DUI, and by the time you get there, they've already extricated themselves and are gone. But that takes a skill set that again takes practice. Here we are in the middle of the summer doing the same. It's pretty hot. I was pretty exhausted after spending the afternoon cutting up vehicles. This is an actual event. Somebody launched over the top of that edge. Car went airborne, landed on the rocks. Below, the driver did not survive. He was in the front seat and ended up coming out the back window. So didn't have any identification, didn't know who to contact, but law enforcement was able to get in touch with his family. We also work with the California Highway Patrol as well as Coast Guard and do launches and rescues and lifts in areas that aren't accessible. This is an individual who one of the officers and I were being lifted up to the helicopter. And of course, we train with them as well. So this is on the side of one of the areas north of San Francisco. And we would rappel down that rock edge and then be lifted by the helicopter and taken away, again, for practice as well as service. We have a Big Sur Marathon every year. It is occurring in about a month. And I'm assigned to be at the 21.5-mile start, not just because that's an area that needs any fire assistance, but it's right on the corner. And as the 11,000 runners are brought down from Carmel to Big Sur, and then they run back as the 26.2-mile event, it's a major traffic area. So I'm there generally every year, along with 2 or 3 other firefighters monitoring that traffic. We do have service as well. We go out at Christmas to bring gifts for the kids. A lot of our workers are immigrants from Mexico. They provide the service industry, both hotel as well as throughout California, and I know here as well in terms of farm substance and what the nation eats. So we all put on a little event along with one of our firefighters as Santa Claus for the kids. We also do elementary school education in having some of our students participate in some water games that we have, as well as filling the bucket and doing some other activities. We do want to encourage them not only to hopefully recruit them to be firefighters, but to know about safety and know about clearance and know about living in an environment where you're really in an extremely rural, protected area. On my way down to Big Sur, one afternoon, there was a fire along the side of the road. Pretty much had run along the highway. This is Highway 101 south of San Francisco. And I stopped actually. My vehicle has all my fire equipment and my bureau equipment in it, and was able to stop some of the sparks and embers that had flown across the highway and had hit on the south side of the highway. So you're never really without having that service in mind. This is during one of our fires where we were in the engine and we were keeping, this is one of the 160,000 acre fires as it was burning down the highway. We wanted to keep it from jumping the highway and going to the other side. We pulled over. We were able to stop that fire. We took a nighttime break at a campground at a little restaurant called Lucia. You can see everybody asleep on the benches. Of interest, a year or two later, that establishment burned. And this is what it looks like after you've had a major fire. So all that white, which looks like snow, is actually ash. And we were out checking for hot spots. I was standing there, and under the ground, through the root system, an area just exploded maybe 20, 30 feet from where I was, which seemingly with 167,000 acres wouldn't be important to take care of, but it is, because that whole area down below was not burned. So had we not been able to get a handle on that, it would have continued. Of course, we enjoy having the recognition and the service, the appreciation for service that we provided. This is that same fire, but with our U.S. Forest Service colleagues. This is the fire department as of about 5 years ago. It's less now. It's always difficult to recruit and retain. So the third area that I've been involved with is with the FBI. And I serve as the tactical physician for the San Francisco Division SWAT team. And this is a warrant execution service. It's search and arrest. We're not there to try and convict. These are very bad people who have been recognized, and they are wanted to be brought into the justice system. And the team that we have, the mission is to bring them in safely, not to have anyone injured, not only the main target, but anyone in the house or anyone in the surrounding area. These are county and state, federal warrants. We are an enhanced team. There are 45 SWAT agents divided into 3 teams. We all function together. We have tactical support members, and we do more warrant executions than any other FBI unit in the country, including New York or Chicago. The only group that does more than we do is the hostage rescue team, which is out of Quantico in the East Coast. These are crimes that involve guns, drugs, murder, gang, terrorism, bombs. I know that at times the FBI does have a bad rap, unfortunately. But when you look at them, and I have nothing to do with any of the planning, I don't really know about why or where until the day of the event. I'm able to go out because these are issued at 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. And it's at a time where hopefully nobody knows that they're being approached and it can be taken care of very quickly. The training for that is I went through 3 40-hour courses over the course of probably a year and a half to 2 years. You had to be certified. It's field medicine in an austere environment. You do a tactical entry and clearance, and there's weapons education as well. I'm not authorized to carry a weapon, but if something happened and one of our agents went down and it was somewhere that I was able to be at least of service to help extricate that person, then you need to be able to have that as part of your resource. So these are multiple missions. They're very complex. Some of them can be years in planning. There's maximal intelligence about these individuals. Their criminal histories are known. The target is known. It's a formal announcement, a knock, and an entry. There's overwhelming presence by law enforcement. First, for the safety of the law enforcement individuals, as well as the safety of the individual who is being targeted. So in my 300 deployments over the last 18 years or so, no shots have been fired. Generally speaking, even for the most violent of individuals who say they would never be arrested, they give up very quickly. And everybody is handled with great respect. So just some of the gear. This is back when we were all wearing N95 masks, now a little bit more liberal. I do train with them as well. I don't carry a weapon with me, but I do train with the group at their range. And it's very tactical deployment. At one point, we were going to practice traveling from the Bay Area up to Oregon. And the area that we cover is Central California, down to Los Angeles, but also go to Salt Lake City, Las Vegas, Portland, Seattle. So we're at the Air Force Station, David Grant at the time, and we're able to load into this enormous cargo plane all of our gear, our bomb truck, and deploy with about 100 of our officers. It took all day to get this packed, flew to the Portland area, turned around and came back and landed. We also have some interesting coverage as well. We were asked to cover the Giants in the World Series. So we had a deployment of 20 of our SWAT officers along with many other local law enforcement. We were watching the game from a back room. We were not out in the public. We also participated in the 50th Super Bowl. This is a counter assault team. And of this group sitting there, I'm the second from the left. There were 2 individuals who were attorneys. One of them had a PhD in microbiology. and the other had been in communications through college and his time after. So a vast variety of expertise in just this small group. So I did get to meet Peyton, not actually, this is the closest I got to anybody at the Super Bowl. And it was between the Panthers and the Broncos, of course. So the deployment can be in an austere environment. This is a group, we were up in Northern California, and we had staged at a prison area that wasn't who we were looking to arrest, but we were there the night before through that night. Another event that was important overall in combining everything was in 2019 at the Garlic Gilroy Festival, it was a mass shooting. So I was returning home from Big Sur Fire Department and training. I was coming north on the highway and saw that there were a lot of agencies responding. So I turned my fire radio on to the medical van and heard all of this traffic that they were requesting multiple helicopters. I contacted our FBI agent who lives in San Jose, very close to here. He was unaware of that. We redirected to the scene, and on the scene, the shooter was down. He had been actually killed. It was first announced by law enforcement, but after he had shot and killed 3 people, he committed suicide. One of those was a 6-year-old child. So there are some 17 other people wounded. These missions have a lot of organization. As I say, it occurs in the middle of the night. In this case, we were at a winery in Northern California where drugs and ghost guns were being produced and distributed. Pretty rural, austere area. And this is a picture of our team as of about 2 years ago. So this is the back of my Volvo, which pretty much has my structure gear, my wildland gear, as well as my FBI gear. As I mentioned, and for all of you, with your degree in medicine, there may be a time when you're off and you're not practicing. You have time with your family, but you always are a physician. And there may be an opportunity, and it's obviously your choice to participate in some area outside of the hospital on a day-to-day basis. So when you're beginning your service and your mission and you're a medical student, there are a lot of ways to fulfill your commitment. Whether you're working with the homeless in your community, you're working with the underserved, you're providing some form of therapy or at least something to make someone's life better, then I think it's important to begin that thought process, even as a medical student, because it will be lifelong. So I've always seen the philosophy that we all have only so much time here on this earth, and we want our presence to have made a difference. So with that, I greatly appreciate you inviting me here today. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to take them either on chat or live discussion.
Dr. One of the questions that somebody has already asked on chat is, first of all, they say, thank you so much for your service and for the variety of service that you're involved in. It's such a great example. But also, you mentioned that you were a volunteer with the fire department. Is it also volunteer with those other organizations that you are involved in?
So the question is that I am a fully certified firefighter. I'm not a sworn federal agent, but I am a volunteer who works under a memorandum of agreement with them, as well as some of the medical missions that we're doing locally. And we provide education and service, not just to hospitals and physicians, but to high schools and elementary schools around Northern California. I think it's important not only to pique people's interest now, whether they do want to go into medicine or whatever else their career aspirations are, to give back more than what you've taken or more than what you would normally do to society, to your neighbors, to your community.
I have a question. I know that this is something that you probably talked about a million times, but would you talk about the leg amputation you did in the car, the collapsed car in San Francisco when the earthquake happened?
So one couple of issues is that every area has that temperature, that climate, that environment that keeps you here, whether it's Omaha or Vermont or San Francisco or anywhere in between. In 1989, there was an earthquake that was centered south of San Francisco. And there were people who were trapped in an elevated segment of the highway. The upper portion collapsed to the lower portion, which was about 60 feet above ground. Now, this was before I was formally in fire or in law enforcement, but went to that area, and there was a 6-year-old child who was sitting in the back seat of a car when the upper deck came down and crushed the front part of the car, and it crushed his leg. So when we went down there, we had equipment, medical equipment. We had heard that someone was trapped, and literally I was in my scrubs when I climbed this truck ladder 60 feet up and crawled between the space of the upper deck and the lower deck. And already there were 8 firefighters from Oakland Fire there and 2 other physicians, a surgeon from our adult county hospital and a pediatric emergency medicine resident from one of the other institutions. So it was impossible to free his right leg, which was literally crushed below his knee. So we started an IV. I was worried because his left leg was like it had slid between the 2 seats in the middle, was also pinned. And the fire team was working very hard to free his leg. So I knew that he would need an amputation. So placing a tourniquet on his leg and injecting local medication into his knee joint, literally it took 5 minutes to amputate his leg through his knee joint. So once I did that and had all the major vessels clamped off, we were able to take him down off of that structure and bring him to our hospital, our trauma center. What I didn't know is I thought it was his mom and dad who were in the front seat who were deceased, instantly killed. But it turns out it was his mother and a family friend. So the next morning, this all took place through the night. An individual came to the hospital looking for his son. And I remember feeling almost a chill in my back because I thought it was dad who was there. And it was his father there on the structure, but it was his father. So he's now 33 years old. has a family himself. His sister was also taken out of the back of the car. She came to us later in the day and needed some major craniofacial surgery, and she's married and has children. So it's something that you always wonder if you're faced with a chore like that on something that you've never really done before. I mean, I've done some field medicine, but nothing like this. How you would react and what you would do, and would you put yourself at risk? Because all of us up in the structure, the highway patrol was below us and saying we had to come down because there were aftershocks, and that area of the highway was ready to collapse further. But we were all committed. As long as he was alive, then we wanted to be able to hopefully successfully rescue him, which that was done.
As a, as an ophthalmologist, of course, I know I would know nothing but about how to amputate a leg. But was that something that you just knew, looking at it? I mean, you weren't going to have to cut through the bone because it'd just be so much easier to just disarticulate the joint and in order
Yes.
to amputate. You just knew. I mean,
Yes.
you knew that
Well,
from your training.
from the anatomy, fortunately, it had not crushed above his knee, but we were ready to do an amputation through the bone as well. So once you we actually used 2 tourniquets called the Geegly saw. It looks like a wire in between 2 handheld areas, and you can literally cut through the muscle as well as the bone of the femur when you're doing that amputation. I was worried that we would have to do something much more with his left leg because it was pinned up to his hip. And I knew that at that point in the field, try and do something that high would either be extraordinarily difficult or impossible. And the fire crew was able to, with various extrication maneuvers of lifting that part of the car, lifting the seat in that vehicle, they were able to free his leg. So it was something that you don't really prepare for. I hadn't really trained for, but in my day-to-day practice over that course of time, with doing some amputations, again, this is in the operating room, along with the orthopedic surgeons, it was something that came to pass that we all decided, the 3 physicians, is that's what we would have to do. And we were able to execute that maneuver and take care of it. Now, just like you have here, there are pretty violent storms that reoccur. We know that for the Bay Area, that wasn't the major earthquake that's going to happen. And it's something that you accept if you're going to live there. You accept if you're going to move from there and go elsewhere and come back. But I think it's an area that you have to feel that's going to be best for you. So for me and my training, I'm hoping never to have to use that again. And you always want to feel that for the next time that you'll do the same thing.
So when you otherwise wouldn't do anything like that, you'd be standing up at an operating room table, but you were not standing up or even really kneeling when you did that.
The distance from the bottom portion of the upper deck to the area where these cars were located was about 4.5 feet at the most. So you could, and for me, I had to literally lie on my stomach to reach inside the side of the vehicle in order to do this. And the lighting that we had were lights that the fire department had that they used to illuminate the scene. And it went from being extremely hot in that area. They would then turn on some extrication fans to clear out some of the smoke and some of the dust. So it would go from being 90, 95 degrees down to less than 60 in October. And I was pretty soaked, and they even were worse because they had all their structure gear on. So the gear that you saw when we were practicing doing some of the vehicle extrication, all that heavy coat and pants. And I'm sure they were suffering much more than I was at that point in that small environment. Yes.
So you're obviously very busy. How do you prioritize your week between being a surgeon and doing these other things? Like, I mean, fires aren't scheduled, so when they pop up, how do you balance that?
Generally speaking, I wouldn't respond from Oakland to drive down to Big Sur to do a fire or a rescue, unless the fire was extraordinary and risked a lot of area, as it did when I drove down and our chief's house had already burned. So my schedule is that if I'm not on call for the hospital, and we still take, our group takes in-house 24-hour call, staying in-house for the trauma center, is that I would go down the weekends that I'm not on call. The bureau work, I generally find out about a week or so before the event, so that I know if it's going to be on a given day. I would never cancel my surgery. But if I had a clinic, I could move it. Or if I had a day that was just meetings, because we would go out at 1 or 2 in the morning to a staging area, then be briefed, and we drive out, no matter if we're going to Los Angeles. Everybody drives down the night before. The planning has taken weeks or months or years, execute the event, and then turn around and come home the same day. So for 70, 80% of what I'm doing with them, it's within a 50 to 100-mile radius.
Okay.
And you can do that with enough time. Sometimes I have to change with one of my partners because I'm on call that night before. But generally, everybody understands that and they're accepting of that.
How do you become a volunteer for the FBI? Do they reach out to you, or how do you go through that process to be able to do that?
There used to be 3 physicians and 2 paramedics, and we all split that time. The person who got me interested had been doing it for probably 20, 25 years. He's now retired. So we would do once every 5 times, and it rotated. So everybody was getting an equal share. Well, about 8 or 9 years ago, the Bureau decided to relook at that program because none of us are sworn federal agents, and the liability is pretty significant. The liability to you personally, as well as to what the service is, to back up an ALS unit. Generally speaking, the unit that we would be in would have 2 SWAT sworn agents with us, or with me, or with them. But they then pulled everybody's credential because nobody's hospital or the county would vouch for having someone to continue to do this. And UCSF did, much to my delight. So as it turns out, now in the United States, I don't know of another physician who actually deploys. There may be physicians with fire departments, and they are the New York City Fire Department physician, or there may be units around the country with the Bureau or with other law enforcement where they have a physician. But for the most part, there isn't anybody that goes out on a daily basis. There are a number of physicians, people especially who are interested in emergency medicine, who go through an academy, and they are sworn officers, either with, I'm sure there are throughout Nebraska, or maybe even here in Omaha. But they also go out and are on patrol. So they combine their medical career with not full-time, but it may be volunteer, it may be reserve, or it may be paid. for me, it's all volunteer. And as I say, I'm not a federal agent, but I'm someone who has been authorized by the FBI to be able to participate with them. So if you're looking for that position, then it's something that in your time or when you're finishing your residency, whatever that is, you can reach out to either local department or to the federal agency and see what their need is. I will say that not necessarily, but I believe when I'm retired from this position with them, or I choose to retire, I don't know that they'll fill it again, because 4 or 5 of the agents on our SWAT team are paramedics, active paramedics. So do you need a physician there? Yes, there's a lot that I can do in the field that they can't. But generally, we're very close, if not by ground, then maybe by air, to a trauma center to be able to bring either an injured civilian or one of law enforcement to that institution for care.
I have another one.
I was just gonna ask, you've had a lot of transitions just from moving around all over the country, and I do see that there's some continuity with the underlying just force being duty to service. I guess my question is, are there any other grounding forces in your life that you feel like have been equally as impactful or pivotal in your development?
I think the grounding for me has been this commitment since I was quite young of entering medicine. And I will say that through all these times of change and training, especially that Liz was with me during my time in Philadelphia, which is a pretty tough 2 years. And we both went our own ways. She came back home to Omaha, where her mom and dad and brother and all the family live, and I went to California. So now we've reignited that commitment, and we'll see where that takes us. But for me, it's that for you, and even around, it may seem a little bit trivial, but around the area, around the hospital, around the community. I know that in Oakland, I'm pretty much known on the weekends because we really don't have environmental services. And Oakland's hospital is in the middle of a really tough section of Oakland that I go around and pick up garbage. And it's like I've been known, early in the morning I'm out there. So it's whatever you can do with the community. I think for you here, it doesn't have to be anything relative to the grounds. But as I say, if you're interested in, the girls' assistance or boys' assistance or some other community-based service that brings for not necessarily only the underprivileged, but certainly the underprivileged community, to have them have a different experience, even if it's just spending an evening with you or once a month or whatever that is important, I think, in what you commit.
How would you suggest that residents continue service with how busy their schedules are?
When you're spending, and now it's what, I think 60 or 80 hours a week, it's changing, that you're right, with all your studies, with everything that you do, it is tough. It is something that may take a hiatus from, even in medical school, obviously, it's very intense as well. But even if there's little things some time that you can spend in whatever community you are, where you're doing your residency, it'd be important to get involved. Not just so the society that you have here and the service, really that's important with that. But if you move to some other area, you'll see that in the community, there may be an opportunity. It may be church-based, it may be faith-based. It could be activity-based in your neighborhood. But it is something that I think it's best to plant that seed. And then when you're finished with your residency, wherever and whatever it is, even for that, you may or may not have a family. You may or may not have children. But for us, especially in fire, is that it really is your family and yourself, and then your work that you're doing, and then spending time as a firefighter. So I think if you want to be off for our volunteers, and there's so few of us, that you turn your pager off, you're not taking call. You may or may not find out about something, but you're spending time with your family. And then for the days that you can take call and you can be involved and you're on the calendar for being available, then you're committed to doing that. So it's something that would evolve different for everybody. Well, again, if there's no other questions from our Zoom attendees, I'd like to thank everybody for inviting me.